Hello and welcome back. It has been quite some time since I made one of these videos, but got a special piece here today that has motivated me to do another one. In here I have a brand new Metadyne Industries Phoenix. If you're wondering what a Phoenix is, well, it's a successor to the Metadyne Industries Thumper. And if you're wondering what a thumper is, it's this. An incredibly compact stock and open class marker with the unique feature of a forward operating pump action. The design allows you to operate it by pulling on the barrel or pushing on the back with these little thumb paddle here. Or optionally, you would actually attach additional paddles to the side rails. The sort of key features here is the fact that you could run this one-handed if you want to, a one-handed pump marker. So it fit into a niche previously, I suppose, only filled by old school Splatmasters and others of the type, double action thumb operated markers. Unfortunately, these were prone to issues. Many of them failed. This one here actually has a variety of upgrades that were made for it in an attempt to fix it, which is the reasoning for this mismatched ano on the front here. Has updated breech, different rear lever here, and some different internals. There was a couple failures. A common one early on was the main piston that actually fires this would snap or bend and no longer operate. The regulators also would get stuck. I think both open and closed. I have a couple that get stuck closed. They might get overpressurized and seize up. They also have a little sensitive clippered valve that would wear out, or again, it's very sensitive to high pressure. And also the early versions had an aluminum hammer that would actually wear out against the valve. And actually a couple other things. But in any case, there was an excellent idea that didn't really pan out all that well. At least enough. It didn't pan out well enough that there was a lot of people who were unhappy with their thumpers. Some of them do actually work. It maybe is just, what sequence it was machined in and various luck, but some of them do work and they're incredibly fun to use since it's such a compact piece of gear. But the Phoenix is here to hopefully resolve those issues. So, what I have is what they call the stock and open class kit. So what it comes with is the Phoenix itself, a stock class feed. Let's see if I can get this to focus. I cannot. There you are. Stock class feed, which is nice. I like the styling on that. And also a feed neck, so you can run a hopper. Interestingly, well, I'll wait to compare it in just a moment. So it's important to note that even though they did list it as stock class, this doesn't technically qualify as stock class, at least if you operate it according to the instructions. So one of the warnings on this marker is not to use CO2, HPA only, which is really only a big problem for anyone who wants to run stock class. If you want to be a true stock class marker, you have to run a 12 gram CO2. I believe that's one of the hard rules from stock class. This, if you use CO2, your warranty is void. So that's kind of a bummer right out of the gate, because that's a form where the thumper was kind of positioned to excel in that niche area. There will be a vertical air version of this, At least that's what they've been saying. There's a plan for that. Hopefully that could run CO2. Time will tell. So anyway, right out of the gate, we have kind of that one shortcoming, but if the marker is overall functional, that probably isn't going to be an impact to many players, just somewhat of a niche. But again, it's a niche that the original Thumper really appealed to. So let's take this out of here, get a bit better view. Oh, there it is. It also comes with the paddles. I'll take those out. As I mentioned, the paddles attach to the rods on the side, which on this design, I'm not sure if I would really use them, but some people I know like them. All right, so there is our Phoenix. So I'm going to start with just kind of an overview of the exterior, what we can see looking at it. Then I'll take it all apart and kind of show the differences compared to the Thumper. One immediate difference, which I'm not sure how well it will convey on video, is the Phoenix is a fair bit chunkier than a Thumper. Now it'll be hard to actually do this comparison. I don't have a good way of setting these side by side. That kind of gets the point. So it's not dramatically bigger, but when you try to actually carry this and say you're holding it as if you're going to use it one-handed, you can feel the difference. It's longer. I think it's a bit heavier. It seems a bit heavier. And I think just overall a thicker build, which on its own, that's not a problem. It's unfortunate that it's a little bit chunkier than the original Thumper, but maybe that chunkiness has allowed them to fix some problems. So we'll take a look. All right, so from the outside here, we have our, just like the Thumper, rear operated cocking mechanism, which is, all right, so can't really show on video, but this action is a little rough compared to a Thumper. One of the things from the Thumpers was the actual action of pumping it is very smooth. This right now, it's a little crunchy, and maybe you can actually hear. You can hear the springs compressing. All that noise you hear kind of translates into a crunchy feel on this action. So we'll see what's up with that when we get further in. One thing I also noticed is the lack of bushing sleeves on these pump rods. Not necessarily an issue, but the Thumper had steel inserts here and here to guide these rods. These just go straight through the aluminum. So possibly risk of wear. I'm not sure how much you actually see, but something to note. On the front here, they have beefed up the nose of this thing a fair bit. You'll notice they've cut this slot all the way through. So in theory, that would make disassembly a little bit simpler, potentially. The original Thumper, to compare, the slot was closed on the front. So taking this apart, you had to do a little bit of careful balancing. Unscrew this, unscrew the back, and then slide this whole thing off and then back on. It looks like they decided to make that an easier operation. So not much. Again, I wouldn't say anything functional there. No functional change. There is a bit of wobble to the rods. So not the smoothest feeling there. If we compare it to a Thumper, the Thumper has a lot less wobble in the rods. So that's very smooth. This one's got a bit more looseness feeling to it. Again, not a problem, just the difference between the two. Perhaps that they actually allowed for machining tolerances to be a bit looser. So we have that difference. No vertical ASA, nor is there any signs of a way to attach one here. So I suspect, unless they got some funky plan, I'm guessing we would at least need a new frame with an integrated vertical ASA, because this does not have any allowances to attach one, as far as we can tell. So continuing on here, we have a slide trigger. The original one also had a slide trigger. The pole is very short and it's not particularly pleasant, but also not, I wouldn't say it's bad. Just like the rest of the marker, it's got that kind of crunchy feel going on to it. So we have a kind of crunchy pump. The engagement here is doesn't feel clean. And the trigger is kind of harsh. Maybe that will smooth out over time. It is a very short pole. Just doesn't feel great as well. All right, now the other, I should say, one of the features that the Phoenix added was an adjustable grip frame. Now, I don't know if people were asking for this kind of feature or not, or if they thought it might be helpful for someone who wants to operate this one-handed with your thumb. Maybe you want to adjust it to fit your grip better. So the angle of this can go from, I think they said 0 to 30, but it's really, typically you call these a 90-degree frame if it's this, and then something like this, I think, for 30. So you can actually adjust this frame, and you can adjust the ASA at the bottom to match, so you can match it and keep it level, or you could tilt it up and down if you prefer, which is kind of neat. Neither of those features to me are a thing that would make me pick this over something else. It's just a potentially neat feature for somebody. I would essentially lock it down and never move it. I would never want that to move. And the downside here is you cannot use standard 45 frame like you might have on your Phantom or on your Thumper. So this worked with, your traditional like AR style frames. Not doing that here. The ASA is an on-off. I haven't checked to see if it purges. I do like this. It's, let's see, a bit over a quarter turn. And smooth enough. Again, I think some of these things will get smoother with use, but you can hear the sort of metallic sound of it right now. I do like the overall aesthetics. It's very industrial, perhaps even more so than the Thumper. And you'll kind of notice, well, let's put the feed here. The body of the Phoenix seems to be a little bit, it's really not much different. But I suppose this milling in the side, along with the Thumper engraved on the side, gives this body a little bit more of an artistic look than this slab of the Phoenix. We do get the nice little Phoenix here, that's very nice. But there's no accent milling besides these bevels on the body. Fairly plain style, which I do like. It maybe it would be nice to get, something here, but again, not a problem. Now the feed neck is significantly thinner and lighter. If I can compare, it's a thinner and lighter setup than the Thumper. I like the look of it. It goes well with the new design. It appears to be maybe barely shorter. I wouldn't even necessarily say that without measuring it more precisely. So this should be about a 10 round, or it should be, I should say, it should be a 10 round, which is probably just barely 10 round. If it's the same length as the thumper was, I think you could oh so barely get the 10 in there, because the 10th round would be essentially still in your tube if you were using a tube to feed it. And they did modify. Now both the stock and open class feeds use 2 attachment points, which I think is nice. It's definitely appreciate that. It does end up with a bit more. It's taller. The whole thing is getting taller. The feed neck is raised up off of the body, whereas the feed tube is raised up off the body. Where on the thumper it was almost, or was it entirely? Yeah, it was basically flush to the body. So difference there. Again, it's more aesthetics than anything. I think I overall preferred the look of the thumper. This is just a little bit chunkier, really, in every way, but still, fairly compact and handleable. It just doesn't quite get that same ultra compact feel of the thumper. Interestingly, on their open class feed here, they opted to go with just a feed neck with the screw. You tighten it down. It's clamping feed neck. Wow, that totally left my brain. Clamping feed neck. Whereas on the thumper, they actually went with an adapter that allowed you to install a CCM feed neck. So with the thumpers, you could choose what feed neck you wanted. It was a threaded adapter plate. You picture this with that top part gone and just threads down there. So you could choose what feed neck you wanted. This takes that choice away from you, but it does mean it's a low profile because there's no added height from the marker. Well, beyond. Interestingly, they still did add some height that probably didn't need to be added. Oh, they did need, metal here for the mounting points. So it's still, I wouldn't call it ultra low, but it's fairly low profile. And again, aesthetically, matches quite well with the rest of the marker. So they've got a consistent aesthetic, very industrial, plain lines. Oh, let's grab these guys while I'm here. These are the paddles I was talking about. Supposedly some of these actually shipped with, I think, 2 of the same paddle. There is a left and a right, and they would normally, I think the typical position is you pull this apart, put it in about here, and slide the rod back through, clamp it down. So you have an additional point to operate the marker. Where I found this kind of thing most useful on the thumper, though, was if you were holding the front as a foregrip with a 12 gram, your thumb would then end up right here, and you use that paddle. With this, that's not, you can still do it. It doesn't feel as good. It would have been nice if there was something here for attaching a foregrip, or if they'll come out with an attachment, but they didn't. To my eyes anyway, they didn't leave themselves much option there, because there's only the one screw right there. So anything you attached that, like, say, slid over this and then screw down in place, would just have that one attachment point of a light, I think it's like a 440 screw. But who knows? That would be nice, but it seems like I wouldn't count on that being available. Someone could 3D print something, though, that kind of slides over here, and then at least the 3D printed part would ideally break before, say, ripping the screws out of the body. So let's see if there's anything else here on the outside to comment on specifically. I don't think so. All right, so what I'm going to do is start opening this up. And interesting to note, they've opted to go with Torx screws in, I think, only 2 or 3 locations. So the grip frame, or I should say the grips themselves, have Torx screws. The little adjustment, the clamping screw for the tilting ASA is Torx. And the screws that actually clamp the grip itself are Torx. Now, I have nothing against Torx personally. It's a very good screw head for ensuring that you can tighten and loosen with a fair bit of force without stripping it out, which I think makes sense for these clamping screws in the grip. And here seems a bit unnecessary for the grips. Yeah, I don't know where my little driver is for this, so I'm just using this guy. Please forgive me. So let's pop these off. And like I mentioned, I think it's interesting they chose to do this with the grips themselves, because presumably I certainly hope nobody's putting that much force onto their grip screws. I'll do both sides, and then we'll come back and talk about the cool stuff we just saw in there. I'll say the stuff we saw in there. Alrighty, grips are off the panels. So standard 45. In fact, these are Pierce Grip Inc. model PG1911-2. So you should be able to use you can use whatever grips, preferably you put them on the right way, but you can use 1911 grips, which is nice. I'm happy about that. If you're going to change something, please don't change standards of grips. So now here you see the pivoting frame mechanism. There's 2 screws with this curved slot. So the whole frame, you simply loosen these 2 screws and then pivot the frame to the angle you want and tighten it back down. So let's loosen. There we go. So they called it 0 to 30, which is in reality I would say 90, because I've never seen anyone call a vertical grip a 0 degree. That's typically referred to as a 90. So there's our 90, and then what they're saying is the 30, which is, I can picture that being helpful to get your hand in the right place for using this paddle here. And maybe that's, so I don't know, that might be beneficial for that reason, but I'd be concerned that the cost of this in terms of durability and compatibility, it kind of outweighs that. Be interested to see what other people think. I have at least one other marker with the pivoting grip, and the same idea. I lock it into a standard 45 location and insist it never moves. And it's kind of annoying when it does. To get this thing nicely in place, you gotta tighten these guys pretty good, which I'm never a fan of having to tighten something down super tight onto anode material that I, in theory, just paid money for. It's not uncommon. Obviously, you're gonna have screws assembling the thing together, but this is gonna be a potentially moving part if you don't get it right, so that'll wear. And you gotta put some good force on it to make sure this doesn't rotate. So at best it's helpful. At worst it's probably just unnecessary, cost. That must have cost some money to design, produce, and alter everything. So interesting anyway. Let's show the ASA as well. As I mentioned, this all pivots. So if you want to run, say a 30 degree, you can then pivot your ASA to match that straight, or you can run a 90, straighten out the ASA. Well, no, you can't. Yeah, you can't. So it looks like the ASA, accurate? Seems like you can't go farther than that. So if you want to run a 90 for whatever reason, the ASA is going to point down, which is probably fine. People often point it down anyway. It's just interesting, the range of motion of the ASA does not seem to match the range of motion of the frame. But again, this whole feature is a really niche thing of questionable value. I will be very curious though to see what other people think about that. Now, what you will notice, assume everyone picked up on it already, is we have a microline here. This is possibly, well, it is one of the reasons they say not to use CO2. There might be others. I don't know about the interior or the internals of this and how well they hold up, but these hoses are not good, not recommended for CO2. They'll burst potentially. And in this arrangement, it is not a simple task to replace this hose because it goes from our fitting here on the top of the ASA up through the grip into a fitting up here. So you actually have to take this all off and then take this off to get to that line. So you don't want to be, even if it turns out CO2 only causes issues with this line, you're not going to want to spend time doing that. And something I'll take a look at, although even just first glance, it doesn't really look like you couldn't fit the end of like a stainless steel line through there. There's not enough space. So that right there, immediately, potential CO2 issue. One other random item I'll point out is these little guides here for the grip panels. I have never seen another marker with that. It's a surprising addition because again it adds more complexity or more milling to do to this part. It is nice that it'll lock in the grip panels. So like, one of those things, certainly no complaints about it from my end. Maybe that actually makes it more of an issue with some grips that are paintball specific. Maybe if I remember, I'll grab some. I think I have some die wraparounds. We'll see if they fit over that. All right, so moving on, because it's already been 30 minutes. I am going to take this off. I'm specifically going to remove the frame from here. Actually, it's confusing. We'll call this the grip frame and then this just the grip. So to do that, we simply continue removing these two screws, which I'm sure I'm going to find the driver for this minutes after I stop this video. All right, those two screws are out. Now, because of this line here, and it has the quick release fittings, so what I'm going to do, and hopefully not make a disaster zone here, I'm going to use my thumb if I can fit it, and nope, I cannot. My hands are small, but I can't really get my thumb. There we go. I'm going to push down on the top of that fitting and pull. So all I was doing was pushing down on the fitting so the line would be released and then pulled the whole top of the marker off. I'm not going to, you know what, while we're here, let's just go ahead and pull that real quick. I don't think there's too much of excitement to see there, but let's do it. Take off our adjustment screw. Please be the same size. It is. Oh, interesting. That is not. I don't like that. All right, I'll show you. 1 second. I strongly dislike that. Okay, so here is our ASA. Now you'll note, and presumably this was done because of the pivot and the location. This, what I would have assumed was a pin or a screw through a pivot point, is actually 2 grub screws on each side, goes through the frame and pinches this here. Again, there's sort of a pet peeve of mine. I don't know, I'm not even sure it's a pet peeve, maybe more just of a peeve, where the marker damages itself in normal operation, even if it's not visible damage per se. This grub screw is, well, you can see, it's going to chew through the ano. It'll either, chew through the ano because you have to have it snug so this doesn't flop around, or you loosen it, and so it's less pressure on here, and then the ASA is not tight. Don't like that. Yeah, just don't like that design. There's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. It's just I personally don't like it. When right out of the box, just taking the thing apart, it's gone. But at least that's not an important part. It's the same thing just with old school rail mounts or even modern rail mounts where you're expected to tighten the grub screw and wrench it into an anodized part. I just don't like that very much. Strongly prefer the companies who have built the ones that use a different kind of clamping mechanism or a ball bearing that applies pressure. Anyway, moving on. I think, yeah, frame as mentioned, so it's curved here, milled specifically for those mounting screws. It is only held onto the marker by those 2 screws, so it does mesh nicely in here. So the frame of this, really the screws are just locking it into place, and it doesn't seem like they would be taking too much of the actual load here. It kind of mates nicely with the body. Now, next step I am going to do is pull off this, which I'm calling everything the frame, but whatever we want to call this. I'm going to take this part off. Now, I should mention, I did take this off yesterday when I first got it, because I wanted to make sure it was at least I knew how to take it apart and it was similar to a thumper. It is similar. If you've taken a thumper apart before, you'll be able to take this apart. Now, one thing I did find, and I've already replaced 1 screw and will replace 2, and this I think is, I'll be interested to see what others, if they take theirs apart, what they find. But the screws on, the 3 screws holding this together, when I first took them out, didn't feel good at all unscrewing them. The sensation of where it feels like something is about to break, like if you're about to twist the head off a screw. And when I looked at the screws upon taking them out, and I'll show you one. Let's see, this is the one I replaced already. Okay, and I get it to focus. And it's going to have trouble focusing on that right now, but you'll see all this here. The threads at the end are kind of destroyed. I'm not sure how that happened. The threads in the body itself seem to be fine, but the screw, they're all kind of crushed down and it was binding up. So I replaced that, and while I'm here, before I put this all together again, I'm going to replace these other 2. I just didn't think about it at the time. And once you have the grip frame on, you're no longer getting to those. So again, there's no shortcuts. If you got to replace this line, there's no shortcut around this, really, that I can think of. So now that this is unscrewed, we're just going to kind of pull it up and off the line. There we have the body separated. You can see your standard fitting here. And let's pop the screws out. So you can see this is my replacement screw in silver. Original screw. Let's notice those are 2 different sizes for some reason. Here's one of the original screws. Similar damage to the threads. We'll look at the body. I think the body was fine. So I'm just going to replace the screws. This one to a lesser degree. Much lesser degree. That's fine. So we'll be curious to see if anyone else sees that on theirs. Here is our trigger assembly. I'm sorry if it's blurry. And it's fairly straightforward. Just a single milled piece, aluminum, and then a steel insert right there, which seems odd, but I will show you how that works. And it is well, I'm not an engineer or anything, so just by saying that, that's probably not boding well, right? But I am not an engineer or an airsmith or anything. I'm a hobbyist and a tinkerer. So I'm going to show you some stuff that I may question, and I'd be interested to know what other people's thoughts are. So I'm just going to try and point things out as I see them. But keep note of that steel insert there. We have our trigger spring, the return spring, and pretty simple. Does this actually push? Yes, push safety. The safety feels fine. No complaints about that. Although, yeah, so looking at it, to me. No, okay, I was gonna say maybe you can slide the safety out, but you can't because of this little bump on the bottom here. Another interesting choice, because to make that bump, when you're milling, that means you had to just mill away a bunch of aluminum here. And so interesting choice on that. Maybe that doesn't cost much, to get a bigger chunk and mill that down, compared to, say, inserting a screw or some other insert, a pin. Anyway, yeah, I think we're all good there. And this insert is all the way through, which I appreciate. Another one of my peeves is inserts that are into blind holes, because that means they didn't intend for you to ever replace a part, which another thing I don't like about any gear that's designed with parts that can't be taken off. Now we are down to the body. So we can see our air inlet. Again, this is a milled in, am I being correct? Yep. Yeah, so this is one piece here. This center, this body's basically three chunks, the front, middle, and the back. This boss here is part of this. It's not screwed on. I assume this was just a plug because they had to mill air pads through, but that's one piece. So again, a lot of material here would be cut down to leave this stump. You can see our hammer mechanism right here. This is what, I should say, it's one of the things that varies significantly from the thumper. The thumper did have issues with the hammer. One of them was it would only cock if the marker was held upright, because it used a little dangling pawl to grab the hammer and pull it back. And it also struck the valve at an angle. So if you picture, well, I'll show you in a moment, but if you picture, if you have your valve, pretend this is a valve and you want to push on this, you want to push on this to open the valve. The hammer actually came down and sort of hit from the top like this. So it was a curved hammer, it would hit and then come through like that and kind of brute force, open the valve. It worked, but the original design with aluminum hammers, as the hammer was hitting, it would just end up cutting a hole through the hammer. And then if you replace the hammer with a heavier stainless hammer, it would end up bending the shaft of the valve. So neither of those solutions are great. This has a different design. I'll show it to you before I try and describe it. Let's see if I can get this off. Yes, okay. Let's take the front end. I'm going to take the pump mechanism out. To do so is fairly simple. It's very simple actually. Just loosen these two screws. or remove and drop it on the floor. Either way, your choice. Once those 2 screws are out, our rear paddle or push, whatever comes out. It also has, so it's aluminum with a stainless bit on the front, which is nice. I'm happy to see that because, you know, they took the time to create a hardened part, or a harder part anyway, than aluminum. So this is a contact part. Here's our pump spring, which we'll get to when we talk about the crunchiness of this guy. And they did do an improvement to the pump rods. The Thumper did not have, at least mine don't, and I don't think they all did, this grooved area. There would be a flat for tightening the screws against, but not a groove. So this ensures that it's not going to pop off the back. Like even over, as you're using it, it's not going to slide off the back because you have this lip here. Now take this out, and that's it. So interesting note here, they did redesign the front breech here. I guess it's not I wouldn't say it's a huge redesign, but it looks like it would actually work better to feed the balls and not get stuck, which was something early Thumpers could do, and even the improved Thumpers I think still had it. When a ball dropped into the breech on an early Thumper, it was sort of balanced on this single point with a detent. On this, you have a nice full breech. The ball's going to land really just like any other marker, land in this nice breech. We got dual, I think it's 3D printed actually, detents. I kind of hope those are just Tipman or some other style detent. I'm not sure, I haven't taken that out. So you'll see the ball will be sitting nicely just like any typical marker. And because of the extended sleeve on this breech here, it's a very thin sleeve, so it will grab the ball as it closes. And it also, this is an interesting design, which is an example, I think, of one item that is perhaps designed with a level of precision that the rest of the marker doesn't quite add up, I would say. So this sleeve, which is nice, this thin sleeve, which should do a great job of cleanly locking the barrel in the breech, also seats into this little groove here. So it seats around our valve, I guess. That's fine, no problem there. But that is a fairly precise alignment, and the wobbly pump arms don't really complement that alignment. So let's see if you push down on this a bit, it hits and then snaps, hit, snap. Not a big problem, but what's happening is the top of this thing is colliding with the groove and then snapping into it. So that will probably vary depending on the barrel you use. If you're using a big, heavy stainless, maybe you'll see that more. Again, it's hard to say if that's going to be a problem. I suspect it will be a point of wear, but not an important one. So let's continue on from there. And I will point out, I believe that's raw. I'm not sure if that's raw or clear ano. I don't usually like seeing raw again. Raw aluminum parts are weak. However, I am happy to say that I believe that entire part is an insert, and the main body of the marker is all anode. It doesn't look... Sometimes when you're getting markers that are early to market, you'll see that they did things that were post-manufacturer fixes, but pre-release. So maybe you'd get a whole gun built, and then they'd realize, you know, there's a problem with the front end, and they'd mill that part after it had been anode. So you'd have raw aluminum on the core of the marker. Prepared thumpers had that, in fact, because they had to rebore the marker, and you ended up with raw aluminum. This appears to be an insert, so the actual core marker is not raw. Let's just go ahead and take that off. Just like the thumper. Got 2 screws here. And I'll note these 2 screws did not exhibit any of that thread damage. Really, it was just the screws in the bottom that I saw that. So here is the front end. You can see our insert that carries the detents, 2 guide pins. I do like the guide pins. I think that's a nice touch. Let's pull out our insert here. I want to see this because I didn't take this out when I was investigating. So that didn't. Yep, that one's out. It's out. Alright, here's our insert. I think that's raw. Someone can let me know if they know better, if that's a raw or clear part. But as I mentioned, the body of the marker, fully anode, so I don't really have an issue with that. As long as the raw part is a replaceable, removable component. Here's the detent, which I am going to assume pops out like that. It does. This is a little 3D printed, I'm assuming this is TPU. Very similar, similar design to the Tippmann detents. I don't know if there's another marker. Another nice thing, so I'm going to look at it, and maybe someone else would know, is this modeled after another marker design? I hope it is. I don't know that it is. 3D printing is nice. I don't necessarily... I don't know. I feel like there's been enough detent designs. We don't really need to make more. But again, personal preference. Can't really complain about that, especially if you could just download and print more of these. But again, this could be based off of, say, a Tippmann or a Intimidator, and you could print that too. But you could also buy it in a store. So, there's our breech. Now, let's start getting into the nitty-gritties. New front end. The volume of this appears to have been increased significantly, and I'll show you when we open it up. They've also added flats to the front. If you've found that the front of this thing got stuck closed, you do have flats. This I believe is purely structural here. This allows them to have the solid structure of the aluminum for attaching their components. You can just see the end of the reg right here. That looks very much like the thumper. Really, if it wasn't for this, extruded part here, I would say this looks exactly like a thumper. But as we open this up, okay, one more minor pet peeves. Hear this? The fit between this and these extrusions here is so close that it's rubbing as I unscrew it. So again, this is one of those things I can't really fault them up for, and I'm not sure if you can see, but it's starting to get the rub mark on this nose plate. This might not show up really well on the video, but you're getting the rub mark. So simply by opening the thing up, I am getting marks on the anode. And here is our interior. Now, no big surprises there. It is, the core of this is still just like the Thumper and the, I think the Havoc, it works the same way. Here's our piston. They did redesign the way it attaches. You'll see a pin, if I can get the spring down. They're using a pin through the nose, through the main, I guess the shaft there, to hold this on. I haven't taken that part out yet, so I'm hopeful that the shaft is steel instead of aluminum. We'll see about that. Because as I mentioned, the Thumpers would actually fail. They would kind of fail, I think, right at this front. It's hard to see on the video here. But there's an O-ring right here that as this actuates, so when it fires, this comes back, opens up the front, and seals here. And when it comes back forward again to recharge, this O-ring exits the, the bore here. It exits the bore, and air seeps past and fills it. So that's a wear point, which is the Thumper has as well, and makes sense because that O-ring is constantly exiting the bore and then re-entering the bore with every cycle. So I used to occasionally tear these, and the main piston, or the shaft here, because it's milled for an O-ring, has a slight weak spot there. And on the Thumpers, somehow something would come out of sync, and this would actually bend. The whole front end would bend at that point, and then your Thumper is basically dead until you replace the piston. Seemingly happened, I think what a lot of people were saying when it happened was they were auto-triggering. Oh, which by the way, this cannot do. No more auto-triggering. I don't care about that. Maybe some people do, but that's no longer a feature or side effect, I should say. But apparently when you fired them fast is when you're most likely to end up bending the piston. So perhaps there was enough movement here, because again, the O-rings that are supporting it exit the bore, so there's a bit of movement. Maybe the front ends of these would catch on the nose or something like that. Not sure. Never seen exactly why that failure would happen. Wouldn't expect it. So I think the key improvements here is what looks like a notably larger volume. It's milled deeper. The nose here is deeper, which should help because of the low pressure operation. I think this is using the same, well, I'll pull it out. This might be the same valve internally as the Thumper, which was a max of 300 PSI. This, I think, is the same thing. All right, let's pull off the back. It's already been an hour of me just gabbing about this thing. All right, 2 screws in the back. Again, I had no issues with these 2 screws. All good. Now, there's, just like the front, there is 2 steel guide pins. And unlike the Thumper, you can just pull this apart without the hammer flying around. So the Thumper's hammer, I didn't quite get that. The Thumper's hammer swung down, and it was spring-loaded so that as you're pumping it, you're actually, how do I describe it? So the Thumper, you push forward, that isn't cocking the hammer. What it's doing is pushing a little pawl, I think they called it, forward, that then catches the hammer and pulls it back. So it's the back, it's not the forward action that was cocking it. That's just catching the hammer, and the release is what's cocking it, which is what allowed them to auto-trigger as well, because if you held the trigger down, you just keep pumping it, it'll fire as soon as it reaches the back. With this guy, you'll see plenty of grease. We have, this is just a spring mechanism here, which is an interesting setup there. So that's fairly smooth. I'll say that is fairly smooth, and the spring action, you can feel a little bit. So I'm gonna want to see that. you can hear maybe, let's see if I can bring this in mic. You can hear the spring. So it sounds like the spring is again not compressing straight and maybe twisting or bending. So it's possible actually just doing something with that spring and then the pump spring would improve the feel of this thing. But let's get back to the point. The hammer. The hammer cocks forward, and you'll see here's the lip. That is what this guy here is pushing against. So as you push that forward, you're pushing the hammer forward and cocking it. Now you'll note the lack of a sear. There's no latching mechanism here. We just have our hammer and a funky little insert here. So that is how this guy actually latches. Let me see, I want to show this because this is one of those features that I wonder about. Let's see. Let's use these screws. It feels odd to me because there isn't a real latching mechanism. It's more about the trigger is just kind of getting in the way of the hammer, which I know that, I'll see if I can show it to describe it better. All right, so now there's no pieces of the trigger right now missing here. This is the full assembly from the hammer's point of view. Hammer comes forward, and let's see, in fact, when the thing is disassembled, okay, pushed, that is in the cocked position. Now I have to squeeze the body to keep that, because you'll see what's happening is the steel insert on the hammer is kind of just pressing against that insert on the trigger. It's not a catch per se. Again, I'm not a machinist or an engineer. I am curious about this design because I would expect that. As that wears, it seems like the trigger would stop holding. And maybe those steel inserts will last long enough that that's not a concern, but it is interesting. So if I just loosen my grip, it fires. Now that won't happen when it's assembled because the whole thing will be pulled down and we'll have, you know, enough of tension between the trigger and the hammer. Let's see if I can show. Yeah, so you see that steel insert. It's kind of a pain to do by hand. It's a tight spring. It's just kind of pressed. It's pressed against it. So I wanted to point that out. That I instinctively don't like it, but I don't know if that's a problem. Again, not an engineer. It's just an odd setup. So let's continue again. Put that aside and get to the main deal here. If you're familiar with the thumper, this looks a lot like a thumper. You can see the back of our piston, our little clippered valve, at least I assume that's a little clippered valve, our regulator adjustment. You'll note they did drill a vent hole in there, which is nice. I had to do that to my own thumpers. I believe maybe all of the production thumpers didn't have that hole drilled, so you ended up with sort of an air spring in addition to the spring for the rig. You were capturing air here and kind of making things a bit odd. So I drilled that out on mine. It may or may not have helped with some of the problems that had. It certainly didn't hurt. So let's go ahead and open that up. Or if you didn't already notice, this is serial number 011. It is marked on the front, maybe the middle and the back of the body. Alright. So, reg adjustment cap, spring. That looks very Thumper-esque. Maybe dimensionally different, but very much like the Thumper. Here's our piston. Also, very much Thumper. I'm curious. I'll have to pull these apart side by side. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'll do some of that kind of stuff later on. That looks visually almost identical to a Thumper based on my memory. I assume there was some changes. Dimensionally, some changes here. This little, that is, can I get that to focus? I want to focus on this. That is that is not pretty milling right there. In fact, maybe that's done by hand. So you can see there's this raised lip here, which prevents the piston from sliding all the way forward, but should allow some airflow around it. The regulator design on these is interesting. Or I should say on the Thumpers was interesting. This looks like it's going to be about the same design. Air comes in between these two O-rings, passes this one and pushes against the piston. So as this slides, is it going to slide back? As it slides back, this O-ring enters a narrowing part of the shaft and plugs it. So on the Thumpers, sometimes what actually happened is this would lock up forward, which could then also close it or get stuck and lock wide open and then overpressurize the valve. So presumably something was changed here. This doesn't really show well, but I can't tell if that was done by hand here, but yeah, it doesn't really matter per se. Just a odd observation. That side. All right, let's go ahead and take out this little valve. Now, this should simply slide out. Yep, clippered. I forget if it's like it's not marked on there. I have a small stack of these. I think it's the same one. Might be MAV 3C, something along those lines. This is what makes the mark of fire. I'm not going to go into super detail on that because I'm already way long here. But continuing on, we will look at our piston. I am very curious to see the piston because I have not gotten in there yet. And since that was a failure point on Thumpers, let's see if that looks obviously different. Again, as I mentioned, the regulator was also a problem. This doesn't have immediate obvious differences. Perhaps the internal milling here changed. You know, different dimensions. So we popped off the front end, push this out the back. All right, so the design is similar, again, similar to Thumper. It has the scalloped milling here to allow, presumably, I'm assuming that's for airflow. It's quite light. What is this material? I'm not, it's very light, but it looks very shiny. It looks too shiny to be aluminum unless they actually polished it. Which maybe they did, but I don't know exactly what that is. It's a fairly light piston. It's also a thin diameter, which is interesting, because on the Thumpers, one of the repairs was a thicker diameter piston. So this will have, can I get to it without, yeah, my hands are awfully slippery now. But because of this O-ring, there's a narrow part of the shaft there, and it would fail right there and twist. Hopefully they figured that out and found they didn't need to beef up the piston to do it. That is the hope. And in fact, if we look at, you can't really see it in the light, but the nose of this thing has a taper, and maybe that is the solution. So it guides the piston to ensure it goes smoothly into this seat. I think the thumper was just kind of flat. You know, there's the hole, just like that, but the back of it was just flat, or maybe a slight taper. This has a notable taper there. So maybe if the piston had that same issue, it will realign itself rather than snap. Let's put that in the pile. We're getting further down in here. So you can see, if I can get the light, so you can't really, much deeper milling, opening up this chamber here. So a lot more air capacity, it looks like, which is good, operating at such low pressures. Looks like it operates the same way as a thumper. The front end will fill with air, and then when you hit that valve, it's going to redirect some air to the back of the piston, which, because it is a larger diameter than the front, that pressure will push it back, which will then pop open the nose. So this thing here would normally be seated in that nose. It'll pull back, open that up, fire the round. And then you release, closes, and refills. As I mentioned, that refilling is because this front O-ring here is what seals the air chamber. Let's show that real quick. So at rest, this is forward. The O-ring is just kind of out here doing nothing, and air is essentially leaking around this piston into our chamber. That's how it fills. The recharge rate, I don't remember having an issue with the recharge rate on these, but maybe that was an issue as well, because there's not a whole ton of flow there, presumably, but you know, maybe it's more than you expect. And then you fire, this thing comes back, closes, so now all this, the air supply is sealed off, and the air from here is blowing out the front. So it's, whoops, I should have expected that. One moment. There we go. So one thing on the back here, it looks like they made an effort to lighten the piston. Otherwise, I don't know why you would have bored that out there, because in theory you're also weakening it. So hopefully that means they're very confident in whatever they did to fix that bending problem. They were willing to actually reduce the material on this piston. I really hope that's the case. All right, is there anything else here to look at? All right, nothing super obviously fitting here. I imagine when we do get a vertical ASA, as I was mentioning, I would guess there's going to be a new lower here that incorporates it and then attaches. Perhaps it'll attach here and we'll plug that. I don't know. Hopefully that's all it is, just a new one of these and not a new one of these. That would be a bummer and would presumably not be helpful for their goal of, you know, regaining their customers. So there is our Phoenix totally broken down. In summary, I guess it's hard to say just looking at it if it is a big step up from the thumper. I hope so. I don't like the feel of it as much. I'm hoping some of that will smooth out. Aesthetically, not as nice in my opinion. It's certainly a good look. The thumper, I think, is perfect. Maybe I'm biased or something, but this is like my idea of perfection. The thumper on paper is my perfect marker. But maybe it just can't happen in this size. So hopefully the chunkiness of this, which is still, as I mentioned, minor, and part of that, it looks like that's probably why we lost some of the pretty accent milling, is because they, opened up the inside and there's not enough material left here to make a nice pretty accent, because they really took advantage of making a larger chamber. This didn't come with a manual, I don't think. Maybe there was one. Excuse me. I think they posted a video that maybe that has what the operating pressure is, based on the fact that it uses this guy. I think it would have to be 300 psi max to this valve anyway. Question would be is how much could you have to the regulator? Since it's HPA, hopefully it'll be just fine with your standard 700 or whatever psi tank, and then this thing can successfully bring that down. Maybe this will actually work at 100 psi with this big dump chamber, but again, it is HPA, but there's a good volume here. That's a sizable chunk of air. If you compare it to, say, like an Automag or something, there's a lot of air there. So I'm hopeful that would work. Maybe even if you want to run CO2, assuming they even say it's okay and this thing won't blow up in your face, maybe you'd have to devolumize it. This might be too big for an efficient CO2 marker. But devolumizing it probably wouldn't be too bad. You would just kind of stuff something in there and reduce the volume of it. We'll see. I do intend, so right now I'm not going to air it up again. I'm going to put it all together and fire it. I will be doing a video of that, and I do intend to try CO2 through it, unless I see something beforehand that suggests it's going to blow up and kill me. I don't think so. All I think is this macro line will fail, micro line, whatever, will fail, and maybe O-rings will fail. Question will be, will the regulator or piston fail? Was this fixed, or is it just on HPA not as much of a problem? Don't know. We'll see, because this thing, again, a big appeal to this is the fact it can run as a super compact dedicated stock class marker. You got your 12 gram, small grip, one-handed. If you want it to be cowboy, you can run 2 of these. That's kind of a niche area there. This, as it stands, not in pieces like this, but this all together wouldn't fit that same niche in theory. It's chunkier, you can't run the CO2, you're technically not stock class. Whoever the stock class, the council stock class, whoever that is, would say, no, that's not allowed, that's open class. Let's see if there's anything else. I think there was one thing I wanted to mention or show off. Yes, here we go. So I was talking about the crunchy feeling of this a fair bit, and I want to kind of show. Let's carefully line you up. I kind of want to show you what that appears to be, and maybe simply replacing the spring will get rid of it. I'm going to assemble it just enough to show you what I want to talk about. Now, here's our rear paddle. The spring just sits in right there. It's very similar to a thumper, but I'm fairly certain I'd have to, oh, you know what? Hold on, this will take 2 seconds. Let me just do this. Again, this is an upgraded one, but I don't think there's a huge difference here. But that would still be a good comparison if something about this is better. All right, so I think we have a bit deeper guide here and a narrower spring. So this spring doesn't have a ton of opportunity to do some weird stuff and go out of control. So it compresses fairly straight, smoothly into this. On the Phoenix, we have a coarser spring, I guess to speak, and it doesn't have nearly that same level of guidance. So we got, you know, this all out here. Now, in the body, it's hard to see because I gotta get a light. There is a bit of a guide in there, again, a bored hole that this will fit into, and I'll do my best. In fact, let me put it in there first. It is in that bore. It's not very deep, you know, it's a shallow bore there. Attach you. And sorry, I'm trying to do this. This is not how you would assemble this thing typically. Okay. So I think as I'm pumping that, the spring is got too much freedom to twist. Yeah. So you can't really see it. I can't get the camera in there to re-see it. But the spring isn't nicely compressing straight. It is flexing to the side a bit and probably hitting on some of the body. Perhaps we can do something about that to smooth it out. Maybe a different spring that's better at holding its own shape. We'll see. That would probably improve the feel of it quite a bit if this spring and then the hammer spring compressed smoothly. This action would feel a lot better. And I kind of miss, I think the guides, the steel inserts, also helped with the smooth feel. I don't know for sure if that's, we'll see. We shall see. And since I have it, one more thing I'll show you. These rods, the pump paddles, I'm sure it's not that size. I'll show you how this is installed. Back that up. So it's going to sit, typically would sit somewhere around here. You could technically put it in the rear if you want to. Slide this in, slide the paddle, and then kind of tighten this down. And interestingly, you can see these were supposedly all tested before sending them out. This one was definitely had the paddles installed because it has the marks from the grip screws. I won't complain as much about this because it's not into an anodized part. So yeah, I'm marking up, I'm creating gouges in the stainless here. But it's a stainless rod and not a pretty anodized part, so I'll give that a pass. The only downside is as you do that more and more and mark this up, you're going to be pulling that marred stainless through our nice aluminum point here instead of a sleeve. So again, the idea would be, and this makes, I think it makes more sense on the thumper, because you could be holding here and then boom, thumb is right here where that paddle would go. So it's kind of natural if you wanted to play it like this. With the Phoenix, without the vertical adapter, your hand will be, you know, there's no reason to have your hand here. That you could do this, which maybe that will be comfortable. So it's not bad. It doesn't feel as natural to me, but I think that would be kind of the way you use it. You could also put it back here if you wanted to play. Maybe you would adjust the grip, actually. Adjust the grip and push on a paddle here. You could totally do that. So I think that will cover for now the introduction to the Phoenix. I was kind of hoping there'd be more obvious improvements. I'm seeing the core components of it look thumper, but I have to stress the fact that changes, just like small changes to dimensions and the design, could make a dramatic difference in how the thing works. So even though this looks like a thumper, it may be far more reliable and functional. That's certainly the hope. And until I get, you know, air on it, and as I mentioned, I will be putting CO2 on it because I want to see what fails. You know, is there hope to get this. You know, can we get to this again? I really hope so. And yeah, I'll be tinkering with this and hopefully taking it out to a shooting video with HPA so I don't ruin it right off the gate. Get a shooting video, kind of show how that works, get a better idea of how it feels, kind of get a hang of this trigger, which, all right, one more thing. I apologize. I don't know when to stop. This was supposed to be just a quick, that's the wrong screw. This is just supposed to be a quick video. And I am now an hour and a half in almost. That's my idea of a quick, why isn't that? Why you know going anywhere? What is going on here? I'm not feeling the little click. Here we go. Nope. What is going on? So the reason I'm turning this backwards, by the way, in case you haven't done that, what I'm doing is turning it backwards with a very light downward pressure because I want to feel the screw when it drops into the thread. You'll feel a slight click. I prefer doing that, you know, to turn backwards a little bit, feel the click, and then tighten it, versus just going straight to turning it, because there's basically no chance of me accidentally stripping it. Actually, I should look for the two messed up screws. I don't really need them for this purpose. What I wanted to show, let's see if I can do it without fully rebuilding this thing. Come on. Yeah. The alignment is fine, I should say. These, the milling does seem accurate. So it's everything I feel, the screws line up, things line up, pegs line up. That is just me fumbling around a bit. So, put this back in. Take our spring, put you in, put you in. That's right, I threw the set screw on the floor. We'll be fine. I can't push that all the way forward. Yes, you cannot push it all the way forward. Okay, and I won't shortchange this thing by not putting the, luckily, the other set screw fell nicely into my floor mat. That ain't right. Maybe that was the ASA set screw. This is this set screw. Okay, so that's reinstalled, you know, incorrectly, but so mentioned, here's our trigger. The thing I am wondering is, yeah, okay, so I'm gonna look more at that. I won't, it's half apart, so I'm not gonna hold it to any of this. But as I mentioned, this mechanism doesn't give the most positive feel, and I suspect if you're not careful to fully crank this thing forward and bring it back, there's the possibility of sort of half getting this. And I did actually have that happen a second ago, but I won't hold it to it because it's in pieces, partially in pieces. So maybe it's a bit out of alignment, but I did have it cocked forward and it did catch, but then when I wiggled it, it fired. So I want to test that out and make sure that there's no way of that happening with the marker fully assembled. Apologies for the awkward cut here. My audio decided to fail right at the very end. So as we wrap up, the only kind of things I wanted to add was I'm going to do a bit more investigation or experimenting with the trigger. I am curious to see if there's a risk of it not fully catching and perhaps firing unexpectedly, or being able to be kind of shocked and fired, since it does have that somewhat odd pins just kind of pressing against each other, but not like a real, it's just not a real solid bit of contact. So I'm going to mess around with that a bit, share some more information as I come up with it, and go from there. So thank you very much. Hopefully this was at least entertaining and perhaps informative if you were considering buying one of these. And I will have more for you soon. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.